All right, good morning to everyone. We are officially kicking off this session. I want to start off by thanking the sponsors of the 2015 Winter Leadership. We have Comcast, represented by Vice President and External Government Affairs Brett Perkins and Executive Director Ron Orlando. So let's give them a round of applause. And then our second sponsor, our regular, Linebarger, Goggin, Blair, and Sampson. They don't have a representative here, but let's give them a little round of applause as well. Is Doug Palmer here, Tom? He's tied up? All right, I want to take a moment to acknowledge our two co-chairs of the Mayor's Business Council Steering Committee. Walgreens National Director of Local Government Affairs, Donovan Peppers. Give him a round of applause. Donovan, thank you. And our past president, representing Capspan Director in Urban Development and Government Affairs, the man who is tied up, Doug Palmer. I want to just say two things. I want to thank our Vice President, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, for coming up from Baltimore. I know you have a lot going on, but for you to be here today and to be a part of the festivities is awesome. So round of applause for our Vice President. And then our second Vice President, Mick Cornett, who his basketball team is starting to make a little bit of a recovery at the right and appropriate times. Round of applause for second Vice President, Mick Cornett. So I know Commissioner Silver is on his way here. I want to give folks in the room an overview. We're going to have Commissioner Silver. We'll have a quick chat. And mayors, if you have questions or things that you want to ask the commissioner, certainly we'll have an opportunity to do that. And then after that, a little later today, you're going to have Commissioner Emeritus David Stern will be here. So we'll actually get two bites at the apple with the commissioner. What I really want to do when Adam Silver gets here, though, is I want to make sure we really thank him. Because he has extended an opportunity for us as mayors to participate in the NBA All-Star Weekend festivities. These are the hottest tickets anywhere, and for him to set aside 40 tickets for mayors is unheard of. So again, when he's here, I want to make sure that we properly thank him. And what we're going to try to do today, I know a lot of you want to get pictures with different folks. What we're going to try to do is probably get our leadership standing on stage when different people are done speaking, and then the rest of the mayors can line up and we can get one group shot. Does that make sense? So Chris Cabalden, you got to be point guard in the middle section there. Let's see. Ivy, you can be point guard on the left, and Mick, you can be point guard on the right. All right, cool. So we'll do that pretty efficiently. So before I introduce my good friend, the NBA Commissioner, I want to take a minute to provide a little bit of context for this meeting. Before today, the New York City, during the NBA All-Star Weekend, just so you guys know, you've heard it from me, this is a really big deal. And the facts that the NBA has opened the doors to us for one of their most exclusive events with the U.S. Conference of Mayors is an honor for us, and they don't even do that for the heads of state to this degree. So it's really a big deal. Tom Cochran, this does not happen. And it just says a lot about how we as mayors are valued in our respective cities around the country. This is all because Commissioner Silver feels very strongly about America's cities and the deep partnership between NBA teams and their host cities. I saw that growing up as a player in Phoenix and certainly traveling around to other NBA cities. Sports are now a more integral part of our society and cities than ever before. Every day we hear and see how sports are helping us address issues such as health and fitness, for our residents, education, the development of our young people, and certainly caring for our elderly. The job of sports has become part of the job of being a mayor. The U.S. Conference has long recognized this importance. Through the conference, we have a standing committee called Tourism, Arts, Parks, Entertainment, and Sports. And then 3 years ago, under the leadership of Mayor Ballard in Indianapolis, we formed the Mayor's Professional Sports Alliance, which is composed of mayors from major league cities around the country. And this allows mayors to meet and talk about common interests and share best practices. So the meeting here today is much more than sports. It's much more than being a mayor. It's a conflux of bringing these two together and finding that nexus which helps and impacts our communities in a real way. We should clearly know that this meeting today, when we leave here, We want to leave with fresh ideas, new commitments, and new things that we can take back to our cities and work collectively to advance our respective communities. Who in here got a chance to go to the Tech Summit yesterday? So all the mayors went to the Tech Summit. That is one of the highlights every year at All-Star Weekend festivities. The public and most people don't get a chance to have access to that. And you got a chance to hear the commissioner talk about what was important for him. You had a panel on gambling. I think it was called Gambling in the Digital Universe, which is a very interesting topic. The next generation of wearables, where you got to see devices and where things are going to be going in the future. A one-on-one with Mrs. Huffington and Chris Como, which was really a remarkable discussion as well. And then obviously at the end of the day, we had an incredible panel with I guess it was called basketball analytics. And as Charles Barkley would say, it's just stats that cost more with the analytics. So Charles had a couple rare lines yesterday. So Commissioner, what I would love to do, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to just introduce you properly. I know I don't want to do formalities, but introduce you properly, and we'll just have a little conversation, and we'll let you get on with the rest of your weekend if I'm okay to do that. All right. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our first invited guest, the 5th Commissioner of the NBA, Commissioner Adam Silver. He has a long and distinguished career with the NBA. He joined the league office back in 1992. Since then, he's risen through the ranks in the front office, prioritizing Players Association, WNBA, the Development League off the ground, and expanding the digital presence in China, NBA China. A little over a year ago, David Stern stepped aside, and the Board of Governors unanimously selected the new commissioner. And in his short time, Commissioner Silver, this is like really cool to be able to say that, Commissioner Silver has established himself as a forefront leader, not only in business and in sports, but in society. You guys all saw what happened with the Donald Sterling incident, and his leadership just solidified who he is as a commissioner, and it happened just a few months into him taking charge. I worked with the Players Association on that particular item with the commissioner, and we were very pleased with the outcome. So, mayors, if we don't mind, let's give a round of applause to Commissioner Adam Silver. Awesome. Thank you. So, Commissioner, on behalf of all the mayors, you got mayors representing, this is the leadership group of mayors around the country, and we have 30-plus mayors here, and probably a third of them have professional sports teams in their respective cities, and then another third have minor leagues or collegiate sports at a really high level. And what we want to do is, first of all, just to say thank you. On behalf of Tom Cochran and our leadership, this is a big deal. We've never been able to do this before, and I know everybody around the world is hitting you up for tickets, but to be able to set aside 40 tickets for mayors meant a great deal. So let's give a round of applause to Commissioner Silver.
You know, Mayor Johnson, if you think it's odd to call me Commissioner Silver. So KJ and I have known each other for a long time, including from when he began his career as a player. And before we get to the discussion at hand, I'm not sure if all of you in this room learned this morning that Kevin, it was announced this earlier today, is a finalist for the Basketball Hall of Fame. So congratulations to you.
You're making me emotional.
Well,
You're supposed to do that.
Well, and let me just say, it's an absolute honor to have all of you here. I actually began my career in politics. I worked on the Hill in Washington for an Oregon congressman. I grew up in New York, but I worked for a congressman named Les Aucoin from Portland, Oregon, as a legislative assistant for a few years before I went to law school. And I've always been fascinated with politics over the years. Followed your career closely, Kevin, to your becoming mayor. Johnson, of course, and then we worked together closely, as you said, not just on the issues around Donald Sterling and working with the Players Association, but of course, maybe more importantly for you and your constituents, the issue of keeping the king in Sacramento. And I would say, I mean, we had a panel on gambling, as you said, yesterday at our so-called Tech Summit, but at the beginning of that tortured process of keeping the team in Sacramento, not that I gamble, but if we had placed odds in the league office on your being successful, I will just say it was a long shot, beginning with what the situation you began with and the particular owners we were dealing with, the very deep-pocketed owners, putative owners in Washington who were looking to move the team. So it was quite incredible what you pulled off, and I would just say it's a perfect example of, I think, an ideal public-private partnership, not just in sports, but in all of society. And I think one of the things we've managed to do with the NBA, working with you, working with Mayor de Blasio in New York around this All-Star game, is for the private sector to come together with the local government, the state government, and do the kind of things everyone's expecting us to do. And I would say, for example, here in New York, this All-Star, I mean, of course, it comes down to a weekend, but it's actually a season-long endeavor of multiple activities. And we met with Mayor de Blasio early on with the Department of Education here in New York, and we said, we want to have an impact on children, boys and girls in New York. That's what we want our legacy to be as part of All-Star. And we came up with a very audacious goal of impacting 500,000 boys and girls. Direct impact in terms of what we consider the values of the game that are so applicable to life, whether that be teamwork, discipline, hard work, all those things that create, frankly, great players like Kevin. And we also said we can focus on fitness together with the mayor's office as well and the school system, because we know, frankly, even in wealthy communities and in poor communities, kids aren't active enough, they're becoming obese, there's incredibly high rates of diabetes. I mean, we see that not just in US cities, but all over the world. And so we, beginning at the beginning of the season, whether it was through the New York Marathon, where the NBA got involved with the mayor's office, we had a relay of a lot of NBA legends who ran a portion of the marathon just to demonstrate to young boys and girls in New York City community that running shouldn't be intimidating, and that just to run a mile a day, run 2 miles a day, how important that is for fitness. And then we conducted basketball activities with the school system, and in fact, it culminated yesterday in New York City. We wanted all 5 boroughs to be involved. We didn't want, and this is something to think about if we're bringing events to your cities. Yeah. We didn't want it to just be focused on Manhattan. I mean, here we had the unique circumstance where we got 2 teams to work together. Of course, a team located in Brooklyn and a team located in Manhattan said, we want you to co-host this All-Star. But then there were 3 boroughs, of course, that were still left out. So we said, we want to make sure Staten Island doesn't feel left out, Queens doesn't feel left out, the Bronx doesn't feel left out. So yesterday, we conducted 100 basketball clinics, 20 in each borough, involving ultimately hundreds of thousands of kids. And what I think is so special about the NBA, and again, no better example than you, Kevin, that we have such a tight relationship with our legends and our alumni in this league. I mean, here, I just came, many of you were at the breakfast I was at this morning, and Bill Russell was there. And I always say, in the NBA, Babe Ruth is still around. Yeah. It's a young league. You have, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was one of the panelists. And Oscar Robertson is here this weekend. And Dr. J is here. And Michael Jordan owns a team. I mean, it's absolutely incredible ultimately that we're a relatively young league. So in the case of this weekend, while so much attention is focused on the All-Stars, as it should be, we have 70 active players in our league. So, the All-Star team, is roughly, we added a few, roughly 15 guys, but then you have 55 other players who chose to be here voluntarily, who said, I want to be part of the activities, I want to work in the community, I want to do things around the league for the weekend. Then we have 150 NBA legends, and we put you on that list, who are in town as well for the All-Star festivities, including 41 members of the Hall of Fame. So I think it demonstrates sort of with a league like the NBA, working in partnership with cities, what an impact we can have. And what was very important for us, we recognize coming into New York that, and it's an awkward position for the league sometimes because there are very few tickets that we can make available for the public. And it's a limitation just based on the size of the building. Teams like the Knicks have a lot of season ticket holders. season ticket holders who are invariably disgruntled. Same thing in Brooklyn.
Why are they disgruntled?
Well,
Sorry.
there's that, and the fact they can't get tickets to All-Star. That's a separate subject. But so you're right. There are those issues. But so what we do is we create activities in the community. We have something called NBA House. We have one in Manhattan, one in Brooklyn, where it's just interactive basketball festival. It's a ticket. It's a $20 ticket, and there's a ton of legends there. They're signing autographs. They have pictures. You can shoot baskets. You can make trading cards, doing all kinds of fun things like that. So in that way, we come into cities like New York, and again, we don't want to just make it for the so-called elite, the corporate sponsors and others who can afford the big ticket items. We want to make sure it's very inclusive.
So, Commissioner, I think you gave us a great overview. So let me ask this. So we went to the Tech Summit yesterday morning, and I guess my big question for you is, what do you hope to get out of the Tech Summit? What was the impetus for putting on a Tech Summit? And then I'm gonna almost like to know from you, what was the main highlight or the main message for gambling in the digital universe and then the wearables and each of them? Because I think just for mayors, I want to be able to connect the dots.
I would say, first of all, this so-called technology summit that we do, it began roughly 15 years ago when the All-Star game was in the Bay Area. We were in Oakland, and Golden State Warriors were the host. And it was the height, frankly, of the internet frenzy. Yeah. And so many people were discussing these issues. We thought, what an opportunity with all this tech talent locally, to have them come in, do panels. And we knew that our business guests ultimately would be really interested in hearing what the experts have to say. And I remember we did it that year and it was successful. And then over the next few years, people kept saying, are you still going to do this tech thing? And then the bubble burst and people said, does it really make sense? But I think from the real agenda for the NBA is we recognize that in terms of next generation viewers, they're not just cutting the cord in terms of cable and satellite, but what they're called nevers. They're not, you ask young people, I'm sure we all have that experience. I used to ask young people in the office, do you have a hardline phone in your apartment or home? And like something that, you didn't think twice about 20 years ago, and then I saw it start changing where the young people, it was unthinkable that they would have a cell phone and also pay $30, $40 a month just to have a hard line that they never used. And then now we're seeing that in television as well, and they say, it's critically important that they have internet connections. It's practically like air or water for young people, but television, they get their programming through other devices. So as a league, as we look out towards the future, the question for us is, how are our fans, 99-point-something% of whom never actually go into our arenas, how are they going to consume our product going forward? And we realize it's going to be on all different types of mobile devices, whether they be smartphones, tablets, et cetera. So that's ultimately and I'd say secondarily, there's how they consume our games directly, but in essence, we're building a fan base through social media. And that's something that I know, and David Stern's coming in later this afternoon, something that we embraced early on. Our view was, the more people are talking about us, the better. We recognized, and something that everybody in this room deals with, that chatter is not always going to be positive, but that there was, as some other leagues I think initially thought, frankly, they could control it. And they thought, we'll only have these official platforms in which people can talk about our sport. We'll spend all our time editing out the negative comments. And we just realized that just like going into an arena, that people are going to yell, scream, be passionate, be critical, but it's part of sports. So at the end of the day, our goal with that technology summit is to get the marketplace, of people who invest in digital products to really be thinking about sports and be thinking of the high value of this content.
What was one takeaway you had from the next generation wearables? What's the one thing that you're thinking about or you think is really relevant to the league?
I think I begin from a performance standpoint, and I think an interesting issue for you, of course, as a former professional athlete, is, there's a lot of discussion about analytics and interesting debate. Charles, I know it when I see it, and some of the young GMs saying, no, you got to look at the data. I think interesting question, and raises a lot of issues, is the data that will come directly from our athletes. And that is in terms of conditioning, what we know about their bodies, what their heart rate is when they're on the line with 19,000 people screaming at them with 2 seconds left, those types of things. I think what is the optimal way to condition our athletes? We've had a rash of injuries in the league. It's not clear in terms of the data whether it's actually worse than it was when you were a player. in part because the data isn't that good from back then. But I think the question is, can we use that data to increase the length of players' careers, to keep them healthier, to get them playing optimal ways? It was interesting. Ariana Huffington, as Kevin pointed out, did a panel yesterday too, and she just wrote a new book called Thrive. And in essence, she tells the story of how she was overworked, she never turned her device off, she slept with it, and ultimately literally fell over at her desk. She fell unconscious, broke a bone in her face, and like reset her life. And I think I know how sleep deprived you and I are, and of course you and I were thinking that and saying, well, what are we going to do? But I mean, I think in terms of our athletes, even things that I know you were probably at the tail end of commercial flying. Was it all charter by the time you're flying, or still some commercial?
First 2 years wasn't charter. The last 10.
And I think talking to players now, I mean, you guys used to do it all commercially, but one of maybe an advantage to when guys flew commercial is you couldn't leave in the middle of the night, and guys in essence had to go back and sleep, and then the teams left in the morning. Now our teams, because they're all flying private, leave often, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, arriving 4 o'clock in the morning. The guys' sleep cycles are totally screwed up. They're often playing back-to-back games. They're often playing 4 games out of 5 nights. And part of what we're trying to get out of that data is how we can improve performance, because, it's clear, the science is absolutely clear, and we can see it in terms of the results. When a team is playing, especially, 4 games out of 5 nights, and talk about gambling, the odds reflect it. That team that's been playing that many games in a row invariably sort of becomes disadvantaged, and the guys are worn down and tired. So that's one of the areas we're very focused on.
So, Commissioner, let me ask you this. So, moving a little bit to kind of social justice issues, maybe. When the Donald Sterling thing hit, and you're a couple months into your beginning of your commissionership, what was your approach to how you felt you needed to handle it? I get the tape, the language, the magic. There were so many elements that were a part of it, but what was it seemed to all of us that you had such a clear focus on trying to get from A to B to C, and then ultimately making the decisions and the sanctions you did. Just give us a little thought behind that.
Well, I'll just begin process-wise that at that point, I had been with the league for 21, almost 22 years at the time that happened. So, and I did spend some time practicing law school. I am a lawyer before I got there. And so, one, I had the benefit, at least of being in the room, to watch David Stern and others handle a lot of crises that we had over that year. So I think that is where, for those of us who sort of come up through the ranks, there's a lot that you can learn.
What would be an example of a crisis that you had seen in the past?
I mean, certainly the brawl we had in Detroit, and how we, with Ron Artest then had gone into the stands and dealing with that, but and other issues, some of which frankly never became public, but sort of going into crisis management mode in terms of the league office, and also, fortunately, having a group of colleagues that many of whom had been with the league at least as long as I have, and we dealt with these things together. So, I'd say number 2, I was very focused on Mr. Sterling's due process, at least NBA style. It's not judicial due process, but if you recall, even though ultimately the press conference I held was only 4 days after we initially got the tape, 2 days later, editorial writers throughout America were saying, how can the league not have acted yet? And of course, it was critically important for me. One, I'd known Donald Sterling for a long time, but hearing an audio recording on the internet, I didn't know if he was going to at least take the position that that wasn't my voice. I didn't know if he was going to take the position that his voice had been doctored in some way. I mean, I'd say in this case, one of the things we did, and I've learned, in these kind of situations, is to begin the investigation immediately, because often, I mean, it's no secret, before people have had the opportunity to really lawyer up and think a lot about, what their story might be. If he's willing to talk to us, because there's not a Fifth Amendment in the NBA. I mean, we're asking questions of our owners, and we had an investigator. I first heard that tape early on a Saturday morning, and we hired somebody who we'd worked with for a long time in New York, and he went. I called him, I said, get in a car, go to the airport. He got the next flight to LA, and by that evening, he was interviewing Donald Sterling, and I think Donald Sterling was, at that moment, I think he hadn't really thought through exactly what was happening, and he was answering the questions directly in terms of the situation. I would say then, we have our own judicial system, in essence, in the NBA. We have a constitution and bylaws. Owners, have rights, and I was limited in terms, while I could, and ultimately, so-called banned him for life, I didn't have the power to force him to sell his franchise. The owners collectively can do that, but the commissioner can't. And I thought here, and I'd say Kevin, he's asking, but he knows, you and I spoke a lot, and I thought I was very concerned about what was about to happen in the league, because our players were being pressured to boycott, many of whom, frankly, as you know, didn't want to boycott, but were being pushed by community activists, others out there to say, you have a responsibility not to play. And I think for professional athletes, many, remember we were in the middle of our playoffs, young men who'd worked their entire life to get to that point were in essence saying, this guy's got a big problem, Mr. Sterling, but it's unfair somehow that I'm not going to be able to continue to compete because of him. And then there was also marketplace issues. There were major corporations, public companies, like Disney Company, like Time Warner, that were involved in the NBA, who were in essence saying, if you don't take action, we're going to have to take action. Now, I'll say, no one dictated to me, no owner, no corporate partner, no player said to me, you need to ban this owner. I think that, what was very helpful to me were discussions I had about process, including with you, Kevin. It wasn't people saying, this is what has to happen. It was people saying, here's how you should approach it. And I think, I was very fortunate at the NBA. I got some terrific advice, and including from some mayors, from some senators, from one particular president, from a lot of people who were saying, this is a very important issue that goes far beyond the NBA in terms of its significance to society, and in essence telling me, and I think it was very helpful, and I'm sure a lot of the mayors in this room are lawyers as well, and I'm a lawyer, saying to me, but don't over-lawyer it yourself. And I think what they were saying is you're gonna be quickly, lawyers are gonna try to limit your options initially. And I think what was very helpful to me was, in essence, people bucking me up a little bit to say, do what's in your heart, do what you know is important. You're gonna get sued, frankly, no matter what you do. And there still is a pending lawsuit from Mr. Sterling against the league.
So, Commissioner, I know you have to run. Let me ask one other question, and then we'll take one or two from the audience. The first one is, coming out of Sterling, I think you and we all feel exhibited like this profile of courage in terms of leadership, what you had to deal with. But out of that came My Brother's Keeper, and a partnership that you had with the President of the United States, and we were there for that announcement. And lucky enough for here, through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we are also partners in My Brother's Keeper. So you're quick, and I see Kathy out there as well. So quick thought on kind of My Brother's Keeper and what you hope to accomplish on that.
Well, I think with My Brother's Keeper, and some of you again were at a panel we held this morning on race with Bill Bradley, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Senator Booker, Michael Dyson earlier today, and I think there's a long history in this league, I think, called activism. I think beginning with Mr. Russell, with Bill Russell, who was present at that breakfast this morning. I mean, it's no secret that a high percentage of our athletes are African American. I'm encouraged by the fact that this generation of players is becoming more socially active. I think it's important, regardless of what their viewpoint is, that they not just be one-dimensional athletes, that they have a point of view, that they try to understand the issues. And I think with My Brother's Keeper, it was an organized way. I mean, there are a lot of programs that our teams have been involved in, that you were involved in, as a player and then as a former player, and the league's involved in. But I felt with My Brother's Keeper, it was a very focused approach to young men of color and the issues they face. And we heard Senator Booker talked a lot about the data this morning on this panel. I mean, frankly, when you hear the raw data in terms of the number of young African Americans in this country are incarcerated, I mean, the statistics are almost hard to believe when you see those numbers. And I think for us, honestly, as the league, to be part of something larger, I mean, we recognize we are a sports league at the end of the day, and there are limitations to what we can do. And I don't just mean in terms of the size of the check we can write, but even in terms of our knowledge of how to approach those issues. And I think that my sense is, and you're very close to it, that this seems like something that President Obama, this is not a government program, it's a private sector program, and maybe similar in some ways to the Clinton Global Initiative. This is going to be his focus post-presidency. And I think for us, And the NBA is a partnership with its players. And I think so it wasn't just a call that we got from the White House saying this is something you should be involved in. It also came from our players, from Chris Paul, who's the great player and also president of our Players Association, saying this is something we should be approaching in partnership. And I think it's a great message. We recognize through the NBA, we have this incredible platform to talk to young people, and the platform can't be, you should aspire, of course, to be an NBA athlete. I think that's why where I began. What we can tell young people is you may not be able to be a great player like Kevin Johnson, but you can, exercise the same discipline, hard work, teamwork, etc., that allowed Kevin to be so successful in every element of his life. And I think with My Brother's Keeper, it allows us to use our platform with messages that are helped designed, frankly, by professionals, who say, this is the right way to intersect with these young men, this is the age. And one thing you and I both heard, speaking of mayors, the last thing I'll say, when we were at one of those initial meetings, Mayor Bloomberg was there. And I thought was helpful is that Mayor Bloomberg, in essence, was saying to the assembled group, people are going to try to pull you into all kinds of other directions, because I think Mayor Bloomberg, with his foundation, made a large personal commitment to My Brother's Keeper. And what Mayor Bloomberg said, and it meant a lot to me, and it's something I've learned from a lot of great business leaders, is that don't let your focus get pulled from groups who are all also very needy. Because even as you recall at that meeting, someone was saying, well, what about young girls? You don't care about young girls? And I think what Mayor Bloomberg was saying, then let's design other programs, not that young girls are so needy, but you have this situation with young men of color in terms of those incarceration rates. And he was saying, I think, a message directly to President Obama, don't lose your focus on this. Stay very, very narrowly focused, use data, measure results, see what works and see what doesn't work, and stick to your guns. And that's why I think even for the NBA, being brought into something larger with real experts, with resources that are coming from foundations throughout the country, I think we can have the greatest impact.
So we take Mayor Cornett, stand up, and just so well, I guess you got your mic. So make sure you just say what city you're from, and then we'll take one more question, and we'll let you straight here. Go ahead.
All right. Commissioner Silver, first of all, thank you for coming to Oklahoma City last season
Thank you, Mayor Cornett.
and meeting with several of us business leaders in the community. And thanks for your access and your ability to come by here this afternoon.
Of course.
I want to congratulate you on the escalation of your recent television contract, and obviously the upside is there for everyone to assume. But I was wondering if there are unintended consequences or negative consequences to the sudden escalation, the perceived escalation in value of all your franchises and the league itself.
First of all, it's a good question, but at the end of the day, and I get asked that, it's a marketplace, and it's the same issue we have in some ways, just to slightly switch topics in terms of the value of our tickets, because people are asking me all the time, aren't you pricing poor people out of your buildings? They're what used to be called ticket scalping, now viewed as the secondary market, is so active and so transparent that you can't price tickets under market, because all people will do is buy those tickets at the under market prices and just resell them for the profit. So you can't, it's actually very hard to find a way to actually move the needy into our buildings in a way where you literally have to walk them in because there's such a great incentive to flip the ticket. When it comes to franchise values, I think an unintended consequence for us, one is one of them I think goes directly to our relationship with the Players Association. And I understand it, because even though I think we have an incredibly fair deal with our Players Association where, in essence, our salary cap is determined by taking 51% of the revenue of the league and dividing it by 30. That's in essence, there's all kinds of nuances to it, but that's what our salary cap is. And it's not based on profit, it's based on revenue. And I can understand if I were a player in this league and saying, well, all right, you're sharing these revenues, but it doesn't seem fair that sort of based on my labor, the value of somebody's franchise just went from $400 million to $800 million. So I would say, and that's of course just on paper. Those valuations are based on Forbes magazine saying, here's our experts saying what their values are, not based on, all of those teams trading in the marketplace, and there's no real public currency to determine those values. So I think it will cause some disruption in terms of negotiations with the players, because the players, I think understandably, will be coming in saying, where's my share of that increased value? We're not being compensated enough just out of revenue, and I think that's an issue we're going to have to deal with. Lastly, I do worry, now even a strange problem to have, but even in terms of very wealthy people, as the value of those franchises get even higher, you dramatically reduce the pool of potential buyers. And I know, for example, years and years ago, I was talking to an owner in our league who also owns a team in Major League Baseball. He told me, I wasn't aware of this. This goes back at least 25 years, that Major League Baseball had a rule where the owner's primary residence had to be in the city of ownership. What's happening now, and it's happening in all the leagues, as the pool of owners, because the values shrinks and shrinks, you end up with a lot of owners whose primary residence isn't in that city. Now you can work through that. I think, for example, there are two New Yorkers who just bought the Milwaukee Bucks. One of them is at every home game. One of their sons works full-time for the team, and they're doing a really good job there. But it's not ideal. And I think even the situation we've had in Atlanta recently, where also that team is now for sale, I think part of the problem there stemmed from the fact that the owner was not part of that community. And while Washington, D.C. isn't so far away from Atlanta, it might as well be thousands and thousands of miles, because he wasn't there, he wasn't with the Rotary Club, he wasn't spending time with public officials, he wasn't there at the restaurants and the clubs and all those places that would give you a better feel. So I wish that if there was any single issue I wish I could fix, it would be connecting those owners directly to their communities. And there's just seemingly no way around that, because the marketplace is what it is for the value of sports.
Thanks, man. Chris, quick question, because I need to get the commissioner out, so go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And if you are, I'm Mayor Christopher Cabaldi from West Sacramento. If you move to a city of residence requirement, think about also the city right next door. But I wanted to ask, yesterday's panel on gaming was really fascinating. I hadn't really thought about these issues. I wonder if you could talk for just a quick second about what do you think, for putting your former congressional hat on, and just the through line, how mayors and the league what issues we might be thinking about together around gaming, and what a strategy for changing the legal regulatory framework might be that we might approach together.
Sure. So some of you may know, I wrote a few months ago an op-ed piece in the New York Times where I advocated the legalization of professional sports betting in the United States. And that position was based on, one, our experience that we've had internationally, where sports betting is legal in virtually every jurisdiction, major jurisdiction where we have large fan bases outside the United States, including China, incidentally, certainly in Europe and other places, and it's widespread and it's regulated. And certainly those of you who've been to English Premier League soccer games, historically they always just had betting windows at the stadiums, and now even almost all of that betting action has moved to smartphones, and they prefer it to be on smartphones because people have to identify themselves. It's not a cash business. There's credit cards and everything else. There are estimates that in the United States, excluding the legal sports betting that occurs in Nevada, and there's a couple other pockets in Delaware and a few other places where there's some forms of legal sports betting allowed, it's estimated that it's a $400 billion industry, illegal industry in the United States. And I think it's one of the reasons, it's no secret why Governor Christie has been pushing to legalize sports betting in the state of New Jersey. We, and together with the other leagues, have opposed Governor Christie's legislation, not, again, because of, at least in my case, a philosophical view against sports betting, but because my concern is that, one, as the courts ultimately held, the law that was passed in New Jersey violates the federal legislation, a bill called PASPA, that only allows for those limited pockets of sports betting. And number two, my concern is that there'll be a hodgepodge of different types of regulations and rules throughout the country. And again, I see Governor Christie, and I think it makes sense in the same way we tax alcohol or other I hate to use the word vice, other entertainment opportunities like that as states and cities are looking for additional revenue streams, I think we should move that business from the underground to a regulated and taxed legal business. And I think where I didn't really think at the time I wrote that I was hoping to begin a conversation. I'm not necessarily looking to become the chief lobbyist on that issue, but I noticed that Senator McCain announced that he's going to hold hearings on the issue. I think it is something, and maybe your association can take a position where I think if we look at it as ultimately, in my mind, the framework goes along the line, something like a federal legislation that allows the states to opt in. And if they opt in, there's a regulatory framework that they're opting into. Certain data is shared with the sports league so that, frankly, we can regulate the betting action. It's no secret right now. We have relationships with the legal sports books, only in that when there is, it's sort of like the same way the stock exchange is regulated. When they see irregular activity and they suspect there's some sort of insider trading, a bleep before an announcement of a deal or something like that, that triggers them to investigate. It's the same thing for the league. If there's unusual betting action on a particular team, leagues will come in, will change the referees, will do investigations. We had a scandal with one of our officials a few years ago. So I think it requires a lot more study. I don't have a draft bill, but I think it's something we should all look at because, again, it's one of those things, it just seems foolhardy. It's hard to imagine there's a person in this room who hasn't had a fun bet on whether it's the NCAA pool or the Super Bowl. We recognize, look, I'll be honest, from a league standpoint, there's no doubt it increases engagement in the game, that if you have a bet within reason, within moderation on the game, but in my view, that's going to happen anyway, so it might as well be so-called brought into the sunlight and regulated.
So, Commissioner, as we let you go, one big thanks again for allowing us to participate. Two, we as the U.S. Conference of Mayors would love to follow with somebody on your team about working together on things that make sense down the road, whether it be My Brother's Keeper. I think all of our highlight yesterday was the NBA Cares program, City Harvest. We were out there and everybody got a chance to work with produce that are going to food banks for the 5 boroughs, which was incredible. I mean, literally, it was everyone's highlight. So thanks for giving us that. I think you represent, again, as I said, what true profile courage looks like. And I met one of your buddies yesterday at the City Harvest event, and I was talking about you having big shoes to fill with David Stern, and he said, Adam's just the real deal. And when you're the real deal, fitting anybody's shoes is not hard. Give a round. I get the last. Oh, no, I don't. No,
I do, because Mayor de Blasio came in after I made some of my introductory remarks. I really do want to thank you, Mayor de Blasio. I didn't say this earlier. I remember you told me when I came to meet you early on, when you'd first taken office, and I said, we're going to have this all-star activities in New York, and we're going to use 2 arenas, we're going to have 5 boroughs, and we're going to get hundreds of thousands of kids involved. You said, this is the best meeting I've had so far. And is there anything I'm supposed to give you? I said, no, this is all good. We just want you to know about it. You're like, wow, this is great stuff. But, you did do an incredible amount for us by coordinating it through your office and the Department of Education. And as you said, this day of service that we had yesterday, and I don't know where you came in, but I said, we had 100 clinics in 5 boroughs yesterday. As we've said publicly, we believe over the course of this year, we're going to impact 1 million young New Yorkers in terms of fitness and basketball activities. So as I said, it's been to us the perfect private-public partnership. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, President.